Now, as you guys know, we are talking about Jesus, and we are talking about who he was and also who he wasn't, right? His ministry, his life, his teachings, his death, his resurrection, and we are kind of going to war the last 3 or 4 weeks against some of the stereotypes, theories, bad ideas about Jesus floating around both inside and outside the walls of the church. We are reading the Gospels. If you are new to the Bible, the first 4 books in the New Testament are called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are 4 first-century biographies about the person Jesus of Nazareth. We are immersing ourselves in these stories and these pages, asking, who is the real Jesus? Trying to figure out, okay, here's where, the stereotypes about him are incorrect and off and products of culture and politics and fads and feelings, and here's the real one. And our hope and our prayer is to emerge from these knowing Jesus in a way deeper way. Now, like I said, we have these street teams on Saturday afternoons. These are folks from downtown, the campus down there, have a heart for the city, heart for people who don't know Jesus, who every Saturday afternoon go out onto the streets of Portland and strike up conversations about Jesus, kind of spreading the word about what's going on downtown on Saturday nights. And right now, these folks are, my wife's right here, she needs a seat. Who has an open seat for my beautiful hot wife? Right here, front row, with an awesome view of your husband, which I know you love, right? Because you love me. Okay, she's right there. Yeah, there you are. Thanks, babe. Anyway, what was I saying? Street teams, conversation. These guys are helping me conduct a survey about Jesus, asking people on the streets of Portland, who do you think Jesus was? Here are some of yesterday's responses right off the streets of Portland. Moral leader, role model, the Gandhi, not God. My savior. Somebody else says, I don't believe in Jesus. I'm a witch. Another person says, a biblical figure, good, positive. I don't think he'd want us to worship him. Somebody else says, I don't really know. He was a very wise man. Son of God. Another person says, Messiah, probably, right? And here's one of my favorites. It doesn't matter because I'm in school. As you guys know, when you are interacting with people, whether it's on the streets of the city we love, or whether it's neighbors and family and friends and coworkers, there's tons of talk right now, kind of in the air, about Jesus, the moral teacher, Jewish philosopher, first-century rabbi, moral example, role model, Gandhi, pacifist, hippie, social activist Jesus, right? He's really popular right now, which is great. But there's not a lot of talk about Jesus as God or Jesus as the maker of the heavens and the earth. Because in today's world, with educated, thinking people, it's really hard for us to believe in a man who was divine. Now, last week, we started talking about something called the incarnation, which means Jesus was God in the flesh. The ancient historic understanding of Jesus is he was and is fully God, fully creator, fully divine, and fully man, fully human. He is the fusion of divinity and humanity, and we hold these two things in tension. Now, last week, we talked about Jesus from the perspective of God, the creator, who became human, who lives among us. He gets sick and hungry and thirsty. He asks questions. He feels. In the end, he dies. Now, the plan for today is to maybe kind of walk over here and think about Jesus from the angle of a man, first-century Jewish rabbi who was God. Now, for most of us here, we're on board with the Jesus as God idea, right? How many of you believe Jesus is God? Right, which means pay no attention to anything I'm about to say for the next hour, right? Because I already know this. I already know Jesus is God. Great, thank you. Last week was new and interesting, and this week's like mundane, right? I know Jesus is God, but if there's anything I have learned in my life, it's that there are more people right here and right now who have doubts and questions and concerns and what about this, than most of us think. Tons of you are wrestling with the deity of Jesus. Now, one of the arguments and objections to Jesus as God I hear all the time is this, and you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with this. Jesus never claimed to be God. The church made up his divinity hundreds of years later. Anybody hear this? Right? It's everywhere. I mean, it's all over the map on campuses and books and websites. Jesus never claimed to be God. These Christians made up his divinity years later. My plan for today is to maybe go to war against the Jesus moral teacher, Jewish philosopher, no more, who never claimed to be God, because maybe that's not true. Now, we're going to walk through the Gospels. We're going to turn to like 15 different places. You don't have to turn to every one of these. If you want, every other or every third. If you're really godly, all 15. Otherwise, no, I'm messing with you. You don't have to turn, seriously. But real fast, before we read, here's the deal. Here's what you have to understand about the Jesus never claimed to be God myth. Think with me. Today, 2010, whatever today's date is, February something, somebody walks out onto the streets of Portland, right into the heart of Pioneer Courthouse Square. Some normal-looking guy stands up at the top of his lungs, says, "Hey, Portland, listen up. Everybody paying attention, listen to me. I am God. I am the creator of the universe in human form. I know I look like a normal guy, but really, I'm God." Now, what would you guys think? He's nuts, right? He's crazy. And that's saying something because we live in Portland, right? He's nuts, he's crazy. Are you out of your mind? We would, one, think he's crazy, and two, laugh at him and walk away. Now, try to do some imaginating. That's not a word. Try to imagine with me. Rewind 2,000 years ago. Immerse your imagination in the first century. You are Jewish. You live in Palestine. You live in an honor-shame society, unlike ours today. Here's what I mean by honor-shame society. Ancient Israel, honor, reverence, respect for God, creator, leaders, figures, authoritarian figures. These are huge moral values in an honor-shame society. Nothing like ours today. Now, when we think about leaders, political figures, presidents, religious figures, we mock those people, right? Welcome to bumper sticker world, right? Whoever you are, if you are famous in any way, shape, or form, prepare for mockery and insults and bumper sticker extravaganza. We have no sense of reverence and respect and honor for those in authority. 2,000 years ago, ancient Jews, honor is everything. To the point God, his honor is above all, above everything. To the point Orthodox Jews, to this day, do not say the name of God out loud, out of reverence for him. He is called by Orthodox Jews the name. We don't even know how Yahweh was really pronounced because the ancient translators refused to write down the vowels out of reverence and respect for God. To this day, Jews write the name of God G-D out of honor. You don't even say the name of God. Now, in a culture like that, world like that, you don't walk out into the middle of Jerusalem, "Hey, everybody, listen, my name's Jesus. I'm from Nazareth up in the north. I am," the name nobody says out loud, "I am Yahweh. I am God. I am the creator in human form," okay? Like today, people would think he's crazy, but unlike today, people would pick up rocks right then and there and stone him to death, okay? Which means Jesus speaks the language of his day. Yes, he claims to be God, but not like people today, not by walking out and saying, "I am Yahweh." He claims to be God in his own really Jewish, subtle, and ingenious ways. Here are some examples. Mark chapter 2, opening line. "A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home." This is really early on in Jesus' ministry. "So many gathered that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them." Everybody here is Jesus is in town. He's famous overnight. Crowds into somebody's house listening to him preach. "Some men came bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get to him because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof," which is what you do when there's no room in the living room, right? "And after digging through," okay, first century, think flat roofs made out of mud and straw. They lowered the paralyzed man, the mat the paralyzed man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are" what? Forgiven. Now, I love this story. I mean, imagine you're the guy, right? You're paralyzed. Maybe we think he's a quadriplegic, no movement in his hands or his legs. His friends show up carrying him on some kind of a mat or a stretcher. There's hundreds of people in somebody's living room, up the stairs, peeking in the windows, out in the front yard, the back. I mean, there's no way he's making through the crowd to Jesus, this famous rabbi who's healing people everywhere. His friends walk up on the roof, start digging through. You're right there. You're in the living room listening to Jesus speak. Mud and straw starts falling down from the ceiling. Blue sky peeks through. People are getting out of the way. These guys are like, "Hey, coming through," right? Lowering the paralyzed man down. Imagine you're this guy. How embarrassed do you think he is? Right? I mean, he's already the guy who can't walk around like normal. He's already embarrassed. And here he is. Everybody's looking at him, crowding around him. Some irate homeowners running around to the top of the roof, ticked off, right? And there's Jesus, I think, smiling at him. And Jesus says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, if I'm the man, I'm thinking, awesome. Any help with the legs? Right? I mean, what's your name again? I mean, Jesus, you're a rabbi? Thank you for the forgiveness of sins. Help, I'm here for healing, Jesus. Now, here's what you have to understand, what goes right over our heads. First century Jewish culture, only God forgives sins. Not rabbis, not priests, not teachers. In the first century, only Yahweh forgives sins, which is why, watch what happens. 6, some teachers of the law, these are the religious leaders, were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's" what? "Blaspheming." You're going to hear this all the time. "Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And Jesus goes on, he heals the man, showing he's for real, right? So we don't have time. My point here is, only God forgives sins. Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. One of the ways early on when Jesus is really subtle, without saying anything from his mouth, one of the ways Jesus argues for his divinity is he does things only God does. Here's one of the examples. He takes worship in the Gospel of John. He reinterprets the Torah in Matthew. He breaks and recommands the Sabbath and says he's the Lord of the Sabbath in Mark. He does these things to ancient Jews only Yahweh does. Only Yahweh has the power and the right to. And Jesus walks around forgiving sins. Turn over to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 22. Matthew 22. As time goes on, Jesus, in his own Jewish kind of roundabout way, argues for his divinity. There are tons of these really subtle examples. Here's one, Matthew chapter 22. Skip down to 41. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, "What do you think about the Christ or the Messiah? Whose son is he?" "The son of David," they replied. Jesus asked these religious leaders a really simple, elementary question. What about the Messiah who was coming, the Christ? Whose son is he? And they say, "Hey, he's one of the sons, one of the descendants of King David." They know this from ancient prophecy. He said to them, 43, "How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? For he says," and now Jesus is quoting David from Psalm 110, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." If David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? Anybody ever read this text and be like, what in the world is he saying, right? Now, these people know exactly what Jesus is saying. 46, no one could say a word in reply. From that day on, no one dared ask him any more questions. These religious guys know exactly what Jesus is saying. Here's what's going on. The Messiah, we know about him. We talked about him 2 or 3 weeks ago. Christ, Messiah, God's rescue plan. To these Jews, we now know as Jesus, right? To these Jews, the Messiah was future tense, he was coming, and there was all this talk in the first century about who the Messiah was. Some of the rabbis think he's divine, others think he's anointed, but he's not God. There's all these arguments about who the coming Messiah is and what he's going to be like. And Jesus jumps right into these conversations, says, what about the Christ? He's one of David's descendants. And Jesus points out something intriguing. David calls him Lord, calls one of his descendants Lord. Keep in mind, honor, shame, society. Fathers are not caught dead calling sons or descendants Lord. Honor, reverence, respect, these are for the parents, for the ancestors, for the fathers, not for the sons. Nobody calls his great-great-great-grandson Lord. But David here, speaking by the Holy Spirit, speaks of the coming Messiah and says he, who's one of his descendants, is my Lord. What Jesus is doing is he is arguing for the divinity of the coming Messiah. But keep in mind, here's what you have to understand. Everybody at this point in time thinks, who is the Messiah? Okay, here's a hint. When you're in church and there's a question, the answer is almost always the same. Jesus, right? 99% of the time. And if it's not like Jesus in some roundabout way, it's Jesus. Go with Jesus and nobody's going to make fun of you, right? Everybody thinks Jesus is the Messiah. By arguing for the divinity of the Messiah, Jesus is arguing for his own divinity. Makes sense? No, let's pretend like you guys are with me. Turn to John chapter 8. Now, those are some examples of really like subtle, kind of roundabout ways. What happens at the end of Jesus' ministry, the Gospel of John is almost all about the end of his ministry, is Jesus at the end grows really bold and blatant in his claims to be God, because now the time for his death is coming. At first, he's really like skittish and keeps his deity on the DL because people are going to stone him to death when he starts claiming to be God. By John, now he's really kind of ramping up. John chapter 8, skip down to verse 51. Jesus is in the temple. It's a long story we don't have time for. He's arguing with the religious leaders, insulting these guys, which is like, you don't walk into the temple and insult the religious leaders in the first century. That's like walking into one of Al-Qaeda's training camps and singing the Star-Spangled Banner, right? Like, seriously, you are signing up for war. And here's Jesus going at it with these religious hypocrites. And he says something bizarre, 51. I tell you the truth, if anyone keeps my word or obeys my commandments, keeps his teachings, he will never see death, never die, right? You think it's weird? Yeah, you're right. 52. At this, the Jews exclaimed, hilarious line, now we know that you are demon-possessed, right? Which is one of the theories about Jesus. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say that if anyone keeps your word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Listen, Abraham, the prophets, these are the most holy, most righteous people in Jewish history, and these guys are saying, these guys died. Jesus, are you claiming if anybody obeys your teachings, are you saying you're greater than Abraham? You are greater than these amazing heroes of the faith? And notice what these guys say next. Who do you think you are? Now, I love his answer. Jesus never claimed to be God. Really? Watch. 54. Jesus replied, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. Meaning, if I walk out on the street and say, hey, everybody, I'm God, who cares? My words are empty. My glory means nothing. My Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. Jesus, rather than arguing for his own, hey, I'm God, he was always after others, most of all, God, arguing for his divinity. Now, here's where Jesus plays dirty, 55. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham had many sons, rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. Okay, now Jesus is talking like he knows Abraham, which is bizarre. Abraham lived thousands of years before Jesus. 57. You are not yet 50 years old, the Jews said to him. You have seen Abraham? Are you out of your mind? You're talking like you know one of our great ancestors from thousands of years ago. Now, here's where Jesus is awesome. 58. I tell you the truth, Jesus answered. He's not speaking in some metaphor, real, honest language. Before Abraham was born, I am. This is massive. This is giant. This is elephantic and huge. He says, listen, before Abraham was born, thousands of years ago, I am. Present tense, meaning I was around. I was there. I was living before Abraham was born. Now, he's not only saying he's really, really, really old, okay? He's also saying something really profound. He says, I am. Now, to us today, we think, yeah, I am. Okay, kind of bad grammar, but okay. In the first century, Jesus is alluding to one of the most famous texts in the entire Jewish scriptures, Exodus chapter 3. You know the story, or at least the cartoon. Moses is there at the burning bush. He says, God, what's your name? And God says, my name. Opening line, when God reveals himself to the Jews, my name is what? I am. Here, Jesus pulls from Exodus chapter 3 and uses God's name, where we get the word Yahweh, uses God's name for himself. It says, before Abraham was born, I am. He's saying, I am God. I am Yahweh. I was around thousands of years ago. I am your God, which is why, 59, at this, they picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. These guys freak out. What are you saying? Now, why is everybody always trying to kill Jesus? Right? If you read the Gospels, all the time, people are chasing after him. Religious people, normal people, villages are always trying to kill the guy. Why? Because he's a moral teacher? Are people trying to kill him for saying things like love your neighbor as yourself? Bless those who persecute you. Why is everybody mad at him? Here's the answer. Turn one page over. John 10, one more story. John 10, skip down to 24. The Jews gathered around him, saying, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly, right? No more hints, no more illusions. If you are the Christ, if you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. Jesus answered, I did tell you, but you did not believe, right? Back in John 8. The miracles I do in my Father's name speak for me. More on that later. But you do not believe because you are not my sheep. Skip down to verse 30. He says, I and the Father are what? One. Now, reading in English, which is a translation from the original text in Greek, which is a translation from what Jesus was speaking, Aramaic, 2,000 years later, on the other side of the planet, we hear, I and my Father are one, and we think, yeah, maybe he means he's really close to God. Maybe he means he knows God in a really deep way, right? Maybe there's some like kind of spiritual, weird, I don't know what he's saying here. Listen, in the first century, when you were Jewish, you hear, I and the Father are one. Your mind goes straight to something called the Great Shema, which is, and to this day, the greatest Jewish prayer, central, prayed 3 times a day by the Orthodox Jews, from Deuteronomy chapter 6, where God says, and I quote, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is what? One. Now, the word one in the Hebrew is echad. Everybody say echad. Like a Klingon, echad, right? And echad is really difficult and confusing for the Jews in particular because the word means a composite one, like one nation under God or one team, not like one person. It means like a conglomerate of different entities or organisms making up one idea. The Lord our God is echad. He is one. To us, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Here's Jesus years later borrowing language from the Great Shema, and he says, listen, I and my Father are echad in these people's imaginations. We are one, which is why, watch what happens. Again, 31, the Jews picked up stones to what? Stone him. But Jesus said to them, which speaks volumes. Like at this point, if I'm Jesus, I'm running for my life, right? Everybody's about to stone him to death. Jesus is like, hey, let's have a talk, right? I have shown you many great miracles from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? Right? Why are people trying to kill Jesus? For saying things like love your enemies and where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. I mean, why? And keep in mind, these are religious people. These are not like criminals and these crazy, violent these are the pastors in today's language. These are like the religious leaders who are trying to kill him. 33. We are not stoning you for any of these, replied the Jews, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. If you were not paying attention right there, last line, for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. I have no idea where people pick up the whole Jesus never claimed to be God idea. People are always trying to kill the guy because he walks around claiming to be God, and in the end, you know what happens. Turn over to Matthew chapter 26. One more before we move on. One more really fast. Matthew chapter 26. In the end, Jesus is killed. Why is he killed in the end? For blasphemy. 26, Jesus is arrested right before he's killed. He's put on trial with the Sanhedrin. We don't have anything like the Sanhedrin in today's world, in Western Europe at least. These are like a religious court. These are religious leaders, priests and rabbis and Pharisees who have power vested in these guys by the Roman government. They have the right and the authority by Rome to execute punishment on criminals, everything but capital punishment, which is why they end up going to Pilate and the Romans, because they want the death penalty for Jesus. But these are a powerful religious court. Now, the high priest was the leader of the Sanhedrin, 63. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. He's on trial, he's arrested, he's in front of the Sanhedrin. The high priest says, listen, you're under oath, you're on trial, tell us in your own words, do you think you are the Christ? Do you think you are the Messiah? Do you think you are the Son of God? 64, yes. It is as you say. I love Jesus. He says, yes, you're on the right track. Mr. High Priest, do you believe in me now? Yeah. You can imagine the high priest. No, wait, Jesus replied, but I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Wow, he's quoting here, borrowing language from Daniel chapter 7. Now, most of us have never even read Daniel chapter 7, much less memorized Daniel chapter 7. These guys are the Sanhedrin. True story. These guys have the entire Old Testament, Genesis to Malachi, memorized. And these guys know Daniel chapter 7 backwards and forwards because it's one of the most famous messianic prophecies in the Jewish scriptures. Daniel 7 speaks of the coming Messiah and calls him the Son of Man, which was Jesus' name for himself, not a son of man, but the Son of Man. He calls himself the Son of Man 80-something times in these four Gospels. Daniel 7 speaks of the coming Son of Man, future tense, who comes from heaven, not from earth, who is with the Ancient of Days, God, and who saves the planet. Here Jesus says, yes, I am the Messiah, I am the Son of God in response to your question. Not only that, remember Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man coming? I am the Son of Man from heaven, and I am here. I mean, he is now signing up for the death penalty. 65. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, he has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now what you have heard this blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered. My point is simply, Jesus claims to be God. These are samples. There are tons of these stories. People are always trying to kill him. He does so in his own Jewish kind of hints and allusions, his own way, not like us today, lives in a different time, but Jesus in his own way claims to be God. The question next becomes for us, how do we know he's not blowing smoke? How do we know he's not lying? How do we know he's not crazy? How do we know he really is who he claims to be? He really is God. One of the answers is by his miracles. Let's look at 2 or 3. Turn to Mark chapter 4. Everybody doing all right? Yeah? All right. Don't worry about the pregame show. You are going to survive. And all the commercials are later on in the afternoon. Mark 4, skip down to 35. There are these moments in the Gospels when Jesus flexes the muscles of his divinity. These moments when he shows us glimpses of his power, glimpses of who he is. Here's one of those examples, 35. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion, which is awesome, I think. Which also, I think, shows the juxtaposition between his humanity and his divinity. In his humanity, he's dead, tired, and worn out. In his divinity, he wakes up and watch. The disciples woke him, said to him, "Teacher," keep in mind, this story is early on to these guys right now, Peter and James. They think he's a rabbi, no more. "Don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Amazing. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified. Now, okay, wait a minute. The storm's over. What are these guys scared of? What's the answer? Always? Jesus, yes. These guys are scared of Jesus. These guys are freaking out and say, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." Whoa, wow, wait a minute. These guys at some point are waking up. It's dawning on these disciples. Okay, moral teachers don't boss around hurricanes. Moral Jewish philosophers don't wake up from naps, speak to nature, and everything shuts down. He is something more. John chapter 2, let's read one more. John chapter 2. John chapter 2 is, I think, one of my favorite stories because it's really funny. It's not like what you would expect from somebody like Jesus, who is God and creator. I think it shows his sense of humor. It shows his playful heart, for lack of a better word at times. John 2, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come," which can be translated, "Mom." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars. 7, Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars." 8, "Draw some out, take it to the master." They did so. The master tasted the water. He did not realize where it had come from. 10, he said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink," right? Meaning when everybody's drunk and nobody tastes anything anymore, you bring out the cheap wine. "But you have saved the best till now." This, the first of his miraculous signs. Signs of what? Signs he's God, signs of his divinity, signs of his power, Jesus performed at Cana. He thus revealed his glory. In these miracles, he's showing us glimpses of his divinity, glimpses of his miraculous power, glimpses, wait a minute, he's more than a moral teacher. He's more than a Jewish rabbi. He's something more. And his disciples put their faith in him. These guys start believing, wait a minute, he's God, he's divine, he's creator. And in the end, after years of these miracles, we are reading like small samples. This goes on all the time. He turns water into wine. He walks on water. He does these, feeds thousands of people, these moments when he flexes the muscles of his godness and his divinity, and he shows us signs he is Emmanuel, or God among us. And in the end, he proves, turn to Luke chapter 24. In the end, he does something really demonstrative, really concrete, showing us his power. Luke 24. You know what happens? He claims to be God. He's arrested by the Sanhedrin. He's killed for blasphemy for his claims. And we pick up the story 3 days later, Luke 24, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning. The women took the spices they had prepared, went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. When they entered, the tomb was like a cave in the rock. They did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning, which means either these guys are very hygienic or they are angels, I'm guessing angels, stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has" what? Risen. 3 days later, he comes back. Resurrection. His tomb is empty. His grave is open. He's not there. He's risen. He appears to hundreds of his followers. One of the intriguing things, I think, when you start to maybe do your own homework and kind of get your hands dirty and study the arguments for and against the divinity of Jesus, if you go back to the first century and read ancient debates between Jews and Christians, not modern debates, but ancient debates early on between Jews and Christians about whether or not Jesus is the Messiah, nobody argues against the resurrection like today. None of these ancient Jews argue against the fact Jesus is alive, because it's common knowledge in the first century in Palestine, his tomb is empty. I know where his grave is. His grave is empty. He's not there. He's risen. In theory, he appears to hundreds of his followers. Nobody argues. He's alive. He's back from the dead. Now, here's my point simply. Jesus, he shows up 2,000 years ago. He claims to be God. He does these miracles backing up his claims. And in the end, he comes back from the dead in resurrection, which really is what separates him from all the other moral teachers and religious figures and religious leaders and founders and philosophers and thinkers. Really, Jesus rises above everybody because here's why. He claims to be God, for one. Buddha never claims to be God. Gandhi, Mohammed, Joseph Smith, Socrates, none of these thinkers, philosophers, leaders ever make claims about divinity. And not only that, Jesus comes back from the grave. Gandhi, amazing man, he's dead. He's in a grave right now. Buddha, all right, good thinker, he's dead. Mohammed, we know where these people are buried. Socrates, brilliant, he's dead. None of these guys are alive right now. Jesus comes back from the dead, proving, authenticating, validating his claims to be not a moral teacher. Yeah, he was that, but something deeper, something more, to be God. C.S. Lewis puts it this way, brilliant mind. He says, and I quote, "I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God." That is the one thing we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with the man who says he is a poached egg, right? I love Lou, he's British, right? With a poached egg. Or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, and he did not intend to. I really like what he has to say. I don't buy the whole Jesus, the moral teacher who never claimed to be God myth. It's simply not true. If he's only a moral teacher, he points out either he's lying to us or he's crazy. And either way, why are we following him? But if he's God, if he really is who he claims to be, everything hinges on his claims. Okay, now everything changes. And the question for us now becomes, how are we going to respond to Jesus and his claims? Now, before we worship, here are some thoughts. In the Gospels, there are 4 different responses to Jesus' claims to be God. 4 different kind of camps and groups of people, 4 different ways of thinking, 4 different ways people respond to Jesus and his claims to divinity. Real fast, let's walk through these before we worship. 1, first of all, you have the believers. You have these early disciples of Jesus, early followers of Jesus, these people who are marked by blatant, concrete, unwavering faith in Jesus as God. Turn 1 page to the right, John chapter 1. John was one of Jesus' closest disciples, and John writes, here's his opening line, "In the beginning was the Word," which is his way of saying Jesus, "and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Really blatant language. 14, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only God." 18, "No one has ever seen God, but God," now he's talking about Jesus, "the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known." Really concrete faith in Jesus. He's saying, listen, Jesus is God. He was around at creation. He is the creator. He is with God. He was God. He is from the Father's side. He is the one and only. Really blatant faith in Jesus as God early on. Now, not all of the disciples are convinced right away. Turn to the end of John's gospel, John chapter 20. John 20, I love this story because it's about a man named Thomas. And I know everybody makes fun of him and calls him Doubting Thomas. To be honest, I really like him. John 20, skip down to 24. "Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.'" Right? Remember the story last week? Jesus appears to the disciples after his resurrection. These guys are hiding. "Hey, I'm alive. I'm back." Thomas, at the time, is out running errands or picking up coffee or whatever. And these guys say, "Thomas, we've seen him. He's back. He's alive." He said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it." Which is proof you only have to say one dumb thing, and if somebody's there writing down what you say, you're in trouble for the rest of your life, right? I like Thomas. I mean, he's not naive. He's skeptical, right? Sometimes I think skepticism is a little healthy, right? And he says, "Listen, I'm not buying what you're saying." 26, a week later, his disciples were in the house again. Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." The first one Jesus speaks to is Thomas. I mean, he walks in the room, "Thomas, I'm here. Here you are. Touch me right here and right now." And Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my" what? "God." Here's his response. "You are Lord and you." He's looking at Jesus, human, in the face, and he's saying, "You are God." I think he gets a bad rap. Why is he called Doubting Thomas? Yeah, he's skeptical. Yeah, he's asking valid questions. But if you do the math by chronology, he is the first one of the disciples after the resurrection to argue for the divinity of Jesus. He is the first one. John writes, and most of these guys who write books write decades later. He says right away, you are God. I love this guy. 29, then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Blessed are those living in places like Portland, Oregon, times like 2010, when everybody thinks we are nuts for what we believe about Jesus and the Bible and God coming to us. Blessed are those people who, unlike you, Thomas, have not seen me face to face. Unlike you, have not touched my hands and my side, but who have believed I am God. Blessed are those people on those plastic chairs in this garage here and now. Blessed are those. Now, my point is simply, from the beginning, there are disciples, there are followers of Jesus who are marked by unwavering faith. I wish we had time to walk through the New Testament and read Colossians chapter 1, verse 15 and 19, Colossians 2, verse 9, I mean, these dozen, Hebrews 1 through 4, these dozens of texts in the New Testament where these authors make these crazy claims. Paul says, in Christ, all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form, right? Hebrews, he is the express image or the carbon copy of God himself. And these crazy claims about the divinity of Jesus. My point is simply, these people believe with every ounce of faith, he is God. Now, I know most of us, I think, are probably like these guys, in that we have questions, but we believe Jesus is God. We believe he is creator. Maybe the prayer for us today is God, recapture us with the gravity and the weight and the power of the idea you're God. One of the greatest enemies I fight in my walk with God is boredom. Because I'm inundated and indoctrinated with these amazing truths. The miraculous for me becomes commonplace and normal and everyday life. And I grow bored, I grow tired, I grow numb, I grow apathetic with these amazing realities. I mean, think about Jesus as God. God, creator of the universe, who's invisible. We are separated from him. He's far away. He's mysterious. He's vague. He comes to us in the person of Jesus. He enters the human story as a man in humility and humanity. He lives with us. He speaks our language. He shows himself to us in ways we get, ways we understand. He gives himself in the end on the cross for our sins, our mistakes, our flaws, and he draws us to faith in him and invites us to walk with him. I mean, I get bored with this? Seriously? I get tired of hearing about this? This should captivate the depth of our beings. Maybe the word is, God, wake us up. God, recapture us with how amazing you are. Because most of us, we respond like these people. But not everybody's response is one of faith. Next, if you're taking notes, you have the unbelievers. Turn to Luke chapter 23. You have the unbelievers, for lack of a better word. You have these people in the stories, in the Gospels, who simply don't buy Jesus and his claims, who simply think, nope, he's a moral teacher, he's nothing more, he's a blasphemer, he's crazy, whatever. Here you have stories, Luke 23, skip down to 33. Jesus is now on his way to the cross. When they came to the place called the Skull, which was a hill outside Jerusalem where they killed people, there they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. They divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching. These are like normal, ordinary citizens. The rulers even sneered at him. These are the religious leaders, the priests and teachers. They said, mocking him, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one. The soldiers also, these are pagans, polytheistic Romans, came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. 39, one of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us while you're at it. My point is, here is Jesus on the cross dying for the sins of people like us. And there are all these different kinds of people who don't buy his story. You have normal, ordinary citizens who aren't mocking him, maybe indifferent, maybe interested, watching, but not buying in. You have religious leaders who are angry and bitter with these dammed up feelings of bitterness and rage against him, mocking him. He saved others, chosen one. You have criminals. You have pagans who don't buy anything in the Bible. I mean, you have all these different people who hear Jesus, hear about his claims, hear about his miracles, hear now about his resurrection, and simply don't buy the story. Think we're crazy for everything we believe. And here's what blows my mind. Jesus the entire time is silent. He says nothing. I mean, he's not arguing. Hey guys, believe in me, right? Hey, have you not heard about my miracle? Have you not heard about my teaching? Believe in me. Oh yeah, I know I'm dying. It's a long story. I'm coming back 3 days late. No, he's quiet. He's silent, taking these insults hurled at him. And when he opens his mouth, he says what? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. If you want to know what God's heart is for people who don't know Jesus, people who don't believe in Jesus, people who hate Jesus, people who blaspheme Jesus, God's heart is, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. They don't know who I am. They don't know what they are saying. All those unbelievers out in the world and maybe right here in the garage, dragged here by one of your friends who is a believer in Jesus. God's heart for you is grace and love, and he invites you to faith. We have believers and we have unbelievers. But there are two more responses in the Gospels. Not everybody is as black and white as these two camps. Turn to Luke 4. I know I'm running out of time here. Bear with me. Luke 4. If you have your Bibles, Luke 4, skip down to verse 33. There are two more, but there's one more response I think is really weird in the Gospels, the response of the demons. Yes, you heard me right. The demons. There are these really funky stories kind of littered around the Gospels. Luke 4, Jesus is preaching in the synagogue on the Sabbath, 33, Luke 4:33. In the synagogue, there was a man possessed by a demon, evil spirit, right in church, right? He cried out at the top of his voice, "Ha! What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." Then the demon threw the man down before them all and came out. Skip down to 41, same day. Moreover, demons came out of many people, shouting, "You are the Son of God." He rebuked them, would not allow them to speak because they knew he was the Christ. Now here's my point. Like we talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago, in Jesus' ministry, in particular at the beginning, there's tons of confusion about who he is. Some people think he's the Messiah. Others think he's Elijah. Some people think he's John the Baptist back from the dead. His own family thinks he's insane. The religious leaders think he's demon-possessed. The only people who are always right about who Jesus is, always spot on in theology, always have all the right answers are the demons. Seriously, read the Gospels. All the time, he's casting out demons, and these demons are saying things like, "You are God, you are the Messiah, you are the Son of God, you are the Holy One." And he's always shushing these demons up. Quiet down, don't get me killed, right? It's not time yet. I'm here, I have some work to do first. Be quiet, shut up, and go away. Now, my point here is simply, demons believe Jesus is God. Demons believe Jesus is the second member of the Trinity. Demons believe Jesus lived, died, and rose again. Demons believe Jesus died for the sins of the world, and by faith in him there is salvation. Are demons saved? The answer is not Jesus. The answer is no. I mean, absolutely not. Why? Because these demons believe in the sense of intellectual assent, right? Believing the right things about God. If there's a multiple choice test, Jesus was moral teacher, historical figure, myth, son of God. Like demons rock that test always, right? But there's no saving faith. There's no repentance. There's no turning away from sin, from the world, from iniquity. There's no faith, no turning to God, no responding to him and seeking him in gratitude and humility and worship, no loving him, no acts, no fruit, no lifestyle backing up faith in Jesus. James writes his book way later, and he argues for how faith without works is dead, how real saving faith is not only believing the right things in your head about God, but living the right way. And here's his argument. You believe in God, he says, and I quote James 2, even the demons believe in God and tremble. My point is simply, I think there are, who knows how many people, in particular in places like America, like these demons. And by that, I don't mean like crazy and evil and horrific, nice people, but people who believe in God in the mind, who believe all the right things about Jesus, believe he's God, believe he lived, died, rose again. Yeah, okay, sure, why not? All right. But there's no saving faith. There's no repentance. There's no turning away from the world. They believe the right things, but the faith is empty. Now, there's one more response before we go home. Turn to Mark chapter 9. One more. You have believers, you have unbelievers, you have demons who believe the right things, but the faith is shallow and empty. And last but not least, Mark, did I say 4? 9? 9? Right, yeah, okay, Mark 9. Last, you have these people who have faith, but it's really weak. Who have faith in Jesus, but it's really, really fragile and delicate. Here's one of the examples. Jesus, I love this story. Jesus shows up, and some of his disciples are with a crowd of people arguing with his disciples. 16, Mark 9. What are you arguing with them about? He asked. A man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit. Notice he says, teacher, not Messiah, not Savior, not Son of God, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, the demon, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. You parents, I mean, imagine one of your sons or daughters demon-possessed, foaming at the mouth, living like an animal, barbaric, and nobody's helping you. Not the disciples, not the rabbis, not your church. I mean, you are alone. Your son's life is going down the tubes. You are desperate. You hear about a moral teacher. You hear about a rabbi who does these miraculous things, and you think maybe there's some hope in him. You travel who knows how long with your son who's a wreck. Your entire life is falling apart. Here's what Jesus says, 19. O unbelieving generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? I love Jesus. He's really honest, right? He's not really polite here. He's frustrated. He's frustrated with the man's doubts. He's frustrated with the man calling him teacher and not Messiah. But notice what he says. Bring the boy to me. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. I mean, imagine if you're the kid's dad. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into fire and water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. Here's a father at the end of his rope. Listen, if you can do, I don't know who you are, I'm here. If you can do anything, help us out. 23. If you can, ? said Jesus. Right? He's playing with the man here. If you can, really? Is that the best you have in you? Is it all the faith you can muster up? I mean, I know you're a wreck, and I know you have doubts and questions, but I mean, is that really the best you can do? If you can, said Jesus, everything is possible for him who believes. Jesus is coaxing faith out of the man, saying, listen, trust me, believe, have faith. Everything is possible for him who believes. Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. One of my favorite lines in the whole Bible. I pray this all the time myself. God, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Help me overcome my doubts and questions and fears. And what about this? And what about that? My skepticism from an unbelieving generation raised on relativism and skepticism about authority and absolute truth and all these things. God, help me overcome my unbelief. And that's enough for Jesus. He rebuked the evil spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him, never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. I love this story. This man's faith is sketchy at best, right? Teacher, rabbi, not Messiah, not Son of God. If you can do anything, help us. But he's desperate. He goes to Jesus not because he's a man of faith, but because his life is falling apart. And here's the beauty of Jesus. Is Jesus frustrated with him? Yeah. But at the same time, Jesus meets the man right where he's at, which is what Jesus always does. He's gracious, he's understanding, he's patient. Here is God, the creator, his own creation with really weak faith in him, and he's patient, and he's gracious, and he's kind. He heals the man's little boy. The beauty of Jesus is wherever you are at this morning, he's not scared of your doubts. He's not scared of your questions. Maybe he's frustrated with you and people like me when we have doubts and we have, I don't know. But he meets us right where we are at. He enters our story. He enters our lives. He coaxes faith out of us. I feel like Jesus is always pulling faith out of the corners of my heart. Whenever there are doubts, I feel like he's always pulling me. What about this, John Mark? What about that? Read here, read there. He's always pulling me into faith in him. And I always land back where I started. Jesus, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. 4 different responses in these Gospels. Believers, and if that's you, awesome. May God recapture you. Unbelievers, and if that's you, may you repent and turn to Jesus who loves you, and his heart for you is grace. Demons, belief, but no saving faith. And people like this dad in the story, scared to death, desperate, lives falling apart, asking for Jesus' help, and Jesus showing grace. I have no 3 points for you today. I have no go do these 7 things. I have no imperatives, nothing for you. I have a story about Jesus, the creator of the world who comes to us, walks on planet Earth for years, 2,000 years ago, claims to be God, does miracles, gives us signs, glimpses, and in the end comes back from the dead. And the question becomes, how are we going to respond to Jesus? I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Amen? Amen. Hey, let's pray.